Hi, I'm Elena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to yet another beginner's guide to a classic literature author I'm sharing on this channel. If you want more beginner's guides, I have one on the Brontes, George Eliot and Virginia Woolf. So this will be the fourth one, and this is all about Elizabeth Gaskell. Elizabeth Gaskell was quite famous in her time, and now she's kind of resurfacing a little bit, Victorian author. Her writing was very versatile. Think Gothic writing, think romance, think political and social themes throughout the plot, being driven forward by the plot, think mysteries and intrigue, and everything beautifully combined in different forms. While Elizabeth Gaskell wrote non-fiction, she mainly wrote short stories that were published, for example, in collections later as we read them now, but in their time they were often published in magazines, most famously Charles Dickens' magazine. The books we now know as her novels were often published by chapter in those magazines. In this beginner's guide I will tell you a little bit about Elizabeth Gaskell, but we also have an actual beginner's guide that tells you which book to read next or where to start. Before we get into picking your next read, let's learn a little bit about Elizabeth Gaskell as a person and an author. Elizabeth Gaskell was born in 1810 in Chelsea, the UK. She was the daughter of William Stevenson, and he was a treasury official and journalist. Her mother was also called Elizabeth. Her mother, Mrs. Stevenson, died in 1811. Elizabeth Gaskell as a baby was said to be raised by her aunt, whom she later described as more than mother. In her early age she traveled around quite a bit, and her father remarried when she was 4. A family member of her stepmother called William Thompson painted a famous portrait of Elizabeth in 1832. In the same year she married William Gaskell. He was an assistant minister at a chapel in Manchester at the time. This is when they moved to an industrial town that inspired a lot of Gaskell's work. She often helped him with his work, and she did a lot of teaching at the Sunday school. She taught reading and writing as well as scripture. Elizabeth Gaskell was incredibly close to the daughters they later had, called Marianne, Margaret and Florence. She lost one son and started to write more as a way to cope with her grief. In their Manchester home, the Gaskell's house was a great intellectual and cultural center, and they invited a lot of people, they hosted a lot. Apparently Elizabeth Gaskell was a very social person. Many of these things that she saw in Manchester she used in her novels and her writing. Her writing was often carefully researched, and she took particular care to make sure that anything connected to northern culture was accurate. As many Victorian women did, she originally published anonymously. A lot of readers came to know her as Mrs. Gaskell, which made her sound matronly and safe. But that was a bit of a delusion. If you look deeper into her novels, you'll see a lot of courageous and progressive ways in which she used social politics. As in her earlier years, Elizabeth Gaskell loved to travel, and she often did that together with her daughters. They went abroad to France, Germany, Switzerland and Italy. These journeys are beautifully portrayed in a book that I truly love, which is called Mrs. Gaskell and Me. On November 1865, Elizabeth Gaskell suddenly died. Her last work, Wives and Daughters, was published after her death in 1866. Now that we know a little bit more about Elizabeth Gaskell, where do you want to start reading wise? Do you want to start with the best, or do you want to start at the beginning? I often recommend starting with a major work of an author, because then you can really decide whether or not this author is for you, and you might get discouraged if you start with a book that's not necessarily well loved. Whatever your journey is, we have different brackets. So if you want to start at the beginning, I would recommend starting actually at the beginning, and that is a book called Mary Barton. I read this book after I read the major works, and I wanted to start at the beginning. This is set in Manchester during a time that was called the Hungry 40s. We follow a working class family who is quite large, and they are suffering from hunger and poverty. We follow Mary, who is the daughter of a man who is very active in a union, and she lands within a love triangle between a man of someone that her family would approve of, so a man of her own station, and a man who her family definitely would not approve of because he is the son of someone who actively works against the union, so the son of the mill owner. And Mary gets enthralled into quite exciting things that don't have a lot to do with romance. This is quite an exciting book. The first half is a little bit slow, but the second half will really engage you very heavily. I quite enjoy this book, but I also see that this book is the beginning of something much larger that Elizabeth Gaskell starts to write. We definitely see the beginnings of Gaskell using mystery and romance and political and social debate as the base of her story. If you want to start with the best, you of course should read North and South. This is probably a book that you've heard of already if you are watching this video. North and South is thematically quite similar to Mary Barton, but the setting is quite different. It's a bit more engaging and grander, I would say. We follow Margaret Hale, who has had quite a high-standing middle-class kind of life in the south of England until her father decides that they will move to the north of England, where they are living in the midst of quite an unhealthy, dirty town in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, where they meet a family who has worked their way up. So in their day-to-day life, it would make sense for them to become friendly with each other, but when it comes to more romance, it's definitely not as appreciated as this society would have it be. The son of this family, who is a mill owner and has quite opposed politics to Margaret, is called John, and they start to form a rivalry friendship because they have these opposing views, but they also feel very drawn towards each other. The backdrop of this book is so incredibly important because it drives the opposing views of the two main characters together. So they're constantly balancing between their opposing views and them actually starting to understand each other as people. This is an amazing novel. Should I call it the Pride and Prejudice of the Victorian era? It is definitely very similar romance-wise, and if you're gonna read any Elizabeth Gaskell, let it be North and South. So now the bracket is coming together. After reading Mary Barton, if that is the way you went, then I would recommend next reading North and South. But if you have now come at the point where your answer is I've already read North and South, we're going one bracket down. Next up, I want you to pick if you want to read another novel or if you want to read short stories. So first, let's do the short story route, and that is to take the short story quiz, because there's so many short stories to pick from when it comes to Elizabeth Gaskell. A, it's Christmas. B, it's a spooky season. C, you want family drama and intrigue. D, you want mystery and the sky. If you have picked A, I would recommend reading A Christmas Tree. This has a similar vibe to other Victorian Christmas stories, and as all Elizabeth Gaskell's short stories, it's definitely worth reading. If your answer is B, it's a spooky season, I would recommend Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales. They are different editions, have different titles, but I have this edition which is called The Tales of Mystery and the Macabre, which contains a lot of different stories. Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales are not at all scary, but they have a great vibe. That's also wonderful to read during the Christmas season. It's always worth picking one up during the spooky season, or if you're personally very interested in Gothic short stories. If you want to read about family drama and intrigue, then I would recommend my personal favorite collection, that is Cousin Phyllis and Other Stories. This is what it says. How I described it is about family drama, so every short story follows mostly a family that is in a different station in life and that has a different problem to resolve, and within the short story the secrets are revealed and these problems are somewhat resolved. It has a great variety in different kind of characters, both in their age and in their station in life. I cannot say a lot more about it because all these short stories, while they really have the heart of the character in the center, they are also quite plot driven and there are a lot of family drama secrets revealed within them. I thought it was a great read and this is my favorite collection, but I am someone who really enjoys reading about day-to-day life, so that's why this is my personal favorite. D, if you want to read about mystery and disguise, I have two specific short stories I would recommend. I made a little mistake here. It is supposed to say The Grey Woman. The other one is The Old Nurse's Tale, about possibly ghosts or possibly no ghosts. It's a bit reminiscent of The Turn of the Shrew by Henry James, so if that is a vibe you love, I would recommend those two stories. If you don't want to go the short story round but want to read another novel, let's go to the right dollar bracket. If you want to read a moving novel about the relationship between female relatives, I would recommend Wives and Daughters. This is unfortunately unfinished, but it only misses the last few chapters. I find calling it an unfinished novel a bit irrelevant because it doesn't read like an unfinished novel. This was Gaskell's last book because she didn't finish it before she quite unexpectedly passed away. This is about two stepsisters who are thrown together, as I think step-siblings often are, without them wanting to be so, and their difficult but also beautiful relationship with both their mother and their stepmother. At the heart of this novel we have these three women. We have the stepmother or slash biological mother and the two stepsisters. Father is present, but it's mostly about these three women and their relationship. It is very day-to-day, very slow, but I also found it incredibly moving. If you are a fan of exploring female relationships in a family and friendship setting, this is definitely the Elizabeth Gaskell for you. If you have also finished this, we're going down the bracket again. If you are done with novels for now and you want to read some non-fiction, I would recommend reading a book that I've not actually read myself, but I would recommend looking into the biography of Charlotte Bronte that Elizabeth Gaskell wrote. So the reason I've not read it myself is because I'm currently reading a much more accurate and modern biography of the Bronte sisters. The father of the Brontes, Patrick Bronte, asked Elizabeth Gaskell to write a biography of Charlotte after she passed away because they were mostly, I think, long distance friends. And Elizabeth Gaskell wrote a biography, a Victorian sense of what a person should be. It is often said that this biography is in no way accurate or in no way telling the truth, but it's the only biography we have of someone who stood so incredibly close to the family. So while Gaskell often villainizes certain people that were in Charlotte Bronte's lives, that a lot of biographies now are saying is not accurate, is not true. It is how Elizabeth Gaskell chose to write Charlotte Bronte's life, and therefore a lot of people do find it very intriguing. It is a book I want to read at some point, and it is a book I have heard people be very fascinated about if you want to read some non-fiction written by Gaskell. If you still want to read more novels, we have a little list of books that are not read as much anymore, but that are definitely worth it if you have made it all the way down to this point in the bracket. A book that often feels like a collection of short stories and is therefore not always loved as much as a novel. It's personally one of my favorites, and that is Cranford. This is a book set in the town of Cranford with a lot of middle-aged gossipy women just doing their thing and living their life. You need to love the concept of that or you will not enjoy this book. I adored the characters in this book, and there is a main plot line, but it's definitely not as important as being with these women who are incredibly stuck in their way of life, and in no way do they want some sort of progress or some sort of change. It's not where their focus is, and in the smallness of their life we also experience a lot of grand emotions and grand connections between the women themselves. It is a very much female centered run town, and it's incredibly comedic and funny. I would say this is the lightest book by Gaskell that I have ever read. If this sounds like your cup of tea, I would 100% recommend it. If you're a bit hesitant, I wouldn't necessarily bother because the premise really needs to sound like your cup of tea for you to enjoy it. If so far in your reading journey you thematically really enjoy North and South above anything else you've read, I would recommend picking up Ruth. This is a very political novel in a way that Elizabeth Gaskell's personal opinion shines through. This is about Ruth, who is a so-called Victorian fallen woman. She has a child out of wedlock, and it's about her trying to provide for her child and for herself and try to create a life. This is found family at its max, and I found this so beautiful. I cried a few times while reading this. Having said that, you definitely shouldn't expect a modern take on these kind of themes. Elizabeth Gaskell clearly struggled herself with how she felt about children being born out of wedlock, and the way it is resolved is with Christian compassion and not necessarily a modern view. This is the kind of book that you need to take as it is and enjoy the compassion and love in the version that is provided within it, but you need to leave your modern views a little bit at the door while reading this. Having said that, if you enjoy the political and social criticism that you have read so far from Gaskell, this is definitely the pick for you. And next up is a book that I have not read myself yet, which I find difficult to recommend, but I'll tell you a little bit what it is about. This is the romance heavy one of the three, I believe, and that is Sylvia's Lovers, a historical fiction set in the 1790s in a seaside town. And we follow Sylvia as she has two different love interests. One of the men is someone who has captured her heart, and the other one is a smart choice for her. What I'm expecting from this book is that it's a romance between passion and rationale, and which one Sylvia will choose. It is historical fiction, so if that kind of works for you, I would also recommend giving this a go. I know that I will, and if it's been a while since I uploaded this and you're watching this, I may have already read it. And of course, if you have started with North and South and not Mary Barton would be within those three as well for you to pick next from if you're looking for another novel. So those were all Elizabeth Gaskell's major works. There are other short stories, earlier works that you can find. Happy Googling if you have gotten that far within the brackets, if you've been such a big Elizabeth Gaskell fan that is the point at which you're at, which is kind of the point I am at right now, which is very, very exciting. I hope this beginner guide has been helpful. Don't be afraid to ask any questions in the comments down below and I will try to answer them for you. For now, I hope that you have a lovely, lovely day or evening, and I hope that you are going to have a great time reading Elizabeth Gaskell. Doei!